Under the king's orders, all mead and other alcoholic beverages had been outlawed. Two guilds, Lackadaisy and Marigold, were constantly fighting each other trying to illegally obtain alcohol for their taverns. Both guilds had discovered that dungeons were the home to seemingly unlimited illicit beverages and would send parties of adventurers to find and loot the alcohol from them. One of these adventurers was Mordebrai Senshi, a hard-working and skilled marksman that specialized in long-ranged attacks. However, Mordebrai was very adamant about severely limiting magic use during his party's raids, believing that it could lead to one's downfall. Mordebrai would enter the dungeons with his party and bring back any treasure or alcohol they found from Marigold's tavern. Thanks to his attention to detail and serious stature, his party's raids were fast and efficient. That was until they ran into Lackadaisy's party. When stocking up on illegal beverages, Mordebrai and his party ran into Rocky from Lackadaisy, a chaotic and eccentric adventurer that was the antithesis of everything Mordebrai was about. A fight broke out between the two parties that alerted some nearby monsters within the dungeon. Both parties were soon overwhelmed and were forced to flee. Unfortunately, Mordebrai didn't make it. His party members, Nico and Seraphine, dragged his lifeless body out of the dungeon and tried to use magic to resurrect him. Unfortunately, the spell was incomplete and Mordebrai's body was revived, but not his soul. The newly revived marksman would shuffle around the Marigold Tavern aimlessly, and no matter what his party members tried, they couldn't get Mordebrai back to his old, efficient self. One night, Mordebrai shuffled out of the tavern and headed back into the dungeon, and neither Marigold or Lackadaisy ever saw him again. Two things right off the bat. Number one, as you can see in the time lapse, there are 6 characters lined up. My original plan was to add in a small squirrel companion for our main character to sort of be like sicking on a person, like, you, go attack. Unfortunately, I forgot how slow I work, especially when it comes to voice actor fusions, and so I ran out of time to draw them. So you can just ignore the 3 characters on the left and focus on the 3 on the right, which were the ones suggested by Knight of Arcane. And 2, I admittedly did very little research for Senshi's character for the story, only because I'm currently watching through Delicious in Dungeons and I don't want to spoil it for myself. Speaking of which, if you haven't seen Delicious in Dungeons, I highly recommend it. It's an amazing show and the cast is incredible. Anyway, back to the design. Unfortunately, Senshi kinda gets the short end of the stick in both design and story. There are a few features in the design that are notable to him: the horns on the head, the cuffs around the arms and legs, and I don't know what to call it, but that the bottom half of his character is included as well. I just really wish I could have found a way to include the big bushy beard, but I had to get rid of that if I wanted Brian's split open mouth to be part of the design. And allow me to boast for a little bit, but this might be my favorite VA fusion I've done in the whole 7 parts of this series. And part of that is because SungWon Cho is up there with Michael Kovac as one of my favorite voice actors. I'd been watching his skits on ProZD for years, and then when I found out that he was a voice actor, I nearly flipped out. And I feel like there's a lot within these characters that were suggested that really work well together. There's a lot of overlap in the character designs. Both Mordecai from Lackadaisy and Brian from Monster Prom have some form of overcoat over their general character design, and I was able to make that taking the more bomber style jacket of Brian and giving it the length of Mordecai's trench coat. Going off of that, both Brian and Senshi have a lot of fur incorporated into their designs. Albeit they look a little different. Senshi's is more fur-based, where Brian's is a little bit more abstract and you have to kind of interpret it as fur, which is what I did. But including both of them, the more individual tufts and then the clumpy collar, really makes the design interesting. I think if I did the individual furs around the collar, it would have been a little too much for the character. And if I did the clumpy furs around the base of the bottom and then the cuffs, it wouldn't look right. There wasn't really any connection between Mordecai and Senshi, but that was pretty okay since Brian really acted as a bridge between those two characters. Now, it's really hard to pick my favorite part of this design, but if I had to choose just one, I would go with the eyes. And now, don't get me wrong, I love the posing and the anatomy. It's very reminiscent of when I turned Charlie Morningstar into a Pokemon trainer, where I wanted to have her hunched over, kind of playing with a Pokemon. But in the time lapse, you saw me constantly just correct the posing until Charlie was basically standing completely upright. It's a much better attempt at that type of pose, and I really like it. It really shows how much I've progressed in pretty much a year of art, since it's been about a year between those two episodes. The reason why I love the eyes is because just overall, I love Senshi's eyes in his base character design. They're just, because 90% of his face is covered by both the helmet and the beard, his face is just eyes, and there's these big, goofy bug eyes that really give him a goober sort of quality, which is really funny. Admittedly, using the eyes did not carry that same goober quality that I wanted to in my design, mostly because A, swapping the color of the sclera and the pupil to match with Brian's makes it a little more horror-based than adventure or just regular character-based, and also including the mouth, especially the ripped open part from Brian, makes it more creepy and subtracts from that goober. But I still really like it because it's very different from eyes that I've done in the past, especially within this series. So I think that was a really cool thing to try out. Another part of this pose that I also tried again from previous works is the arm pointing outward type of pose. And the general hand and foreshortening is good, but once again, I feel like the arm could use some work. The arm always feels like it's not long enough for the foreshortening, but adding in those cuffs from Senshi really showed me like where each section of the arm would end. Then to finally finish the piece, I'm now realizing how much I wrote for the design notes for just this first character. But to finish up the piece, I tried out some new shading techniques. As I've mentioned before, I usually do 1 or 2 layers on multiply for my shading. But this time I wanted to switch it up just for the heck of it, and instead of using a multiply layer, I used the first layer of shadows just to give all the shapes their form, so like the shapes on the edges of objects. I went with a linear burn layer instead, and then for my second layer on multiply, I use that specifically just for the cast shadows, or in other words, the shadows from one object that are cast onto another. And I think it's really cool. It's a shading technique I learned from Mary Landrau, who I'm sure you've heard me talk about on this channel before. And like my Lust OC drawing, I tried out that harsh white rim lighting that is seen in Marvel Rivals, a game which I'm sure you've heard me talk about on this channel before. And I really liked the look of them so much that I carried it over into the next 2 pieces. But before we get to those, let's take a final look at SungWon Cho with Mordecai Heller, Brian... I didn't look up if there was a last name for him. Brian Monster Prom, and Senshi from Delicious in Dungeon. With the world in ruin from invading robotic bears, the Japanese government decided to shelter small groups of people in different bunkers to protect them from the mechanical forces and serve as humanity's last hope. The people chosen ranged from high school students to criminals to wealthy business owners. But within one of these groups, there was one who stood out from everybody else. Joe B. Kurumari was not a human, but rather an android meant to look like a human, to keep watch over the others in Bunker 53, codenamed Stone Ocean. Joe B was programmed with the memories of being the ultimate maid, being able to serve others within her bunker and complete any task given to her. Unfortunately, Joe B's bunker was hijacked by the invading life forms, and she, along with everyone else within Stone Ocean, were forced to participate in a killing game. While going about her day-to-day, making sure that everyone was getting along in the hopes of preventing a murder, Joe B came across a mysterious-looking stone wedged into one of the bunker's walls. As soon as she touched it, a sharp pain spread through her body, and she passed out. She awoke sometime later to nothing but ruin. The bunker she was programmed to protect was destroyed, and the bodies of her companions were littered all throughout what remained. The mechanical bears forcing them to kill each other in order to survive. Rage and desperation flowed through Joe B's body, having been unable to complete her main task. The rage swirled around her in a wispy light and manifested itself as a set of sprawling wings and a vacuum cleaner. Joe B launched herself out of the ruins of Bunker 53, ready to take revenge on the machines that destroyed her world. This is by far the hardest one I've done within this series, and that was partially my fault. As you saw, the original comment suggested fusing Marie from Skullgirls, Kurumi Tojo from Danganronpa, and 2B from Nier Automata. Sorry if I pronounced that last one wrong. A cast of characters that all share a very dark color palette, and for two of them, very maid-like outfits. And if you've been following along with the series, you'll know that it's possible for characters to be too similar to each other to the point where fusing them becomes difficult. Such was the case for Marie and Kurumi, and a little bit of 2B, but not as much. Marie and Kurumi's maid-like outfits really made representing one over the other very difficult, because you could see a certain design choice as being, oh, it could be her, or it could be the other one. Such as like the dresses, the aprons, just the overall maid aesthetic was really hard to discern between the two. And just to up the ante, and a little bit because of religious obligation, I threw in Jolene Cujo from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, thereby giving me more character aspects to work with, but also giving me another character I had to figure out how to include into the main design. And also breaking my rule of 3, but we really left that in the last episode of this series. Like SungWon's fusion, I wanted to include a second subject into this fusion, as I figured it would help me be able to include more elements of each character, and both because Marie and Jolene have these ghostly apparitions as part of their character. Marie with the skeletal figures that you saw in the reference images, and Jolene with her stand stone free. However, unlike SungWon, I decided not to include a second subject because I just felt like it wasn't working with what I currently had on the canvas, much rather than a time constraint, although time did play a little bit of a factor too into it. Instead, I decided to add these big, sprawling, ethereal wings that Marie has as a way to separate her aspects from the more maid ones that I included for Kurumi. That being said, I definitely feel that in the design, Kurumi is the least represented within this character, as anything I drew in for her could easily be interpreted as either Marie or 2B. The apron, the headband, so on and so forth. So I had to pick out some elements that were specifically Kurumi's and add that to the overall character. Kurumi's gloves with the little rings on them, her tie, and the spiderweb pattern across her apron. Doing the same with the other characters, for 2B I added in her blindfold, the puffy shoulders she has, and her unitar design, which is so hidden behind the apron that it's barely even noticeable. And then for Marie, like I mentioned, I went with the big sprawling wings, her skull motif that I included in her hair, and of course the vacuum. And speaking of that vacuum, for some reason, I have no idea why, but I attached Kurumi's broom to Marie's vacuum, thereby making a cleaning product that just literally makes no sense. Like, the broom doesn't have anything in it that would justify having a tube run through it. So I wound up changing it, getting rid of the broom bristles and just turning it into a normal vacuum head, which meant I got to keep my favorite part of the broom vacuum doohickey, which was adding the base design, especially in the face of Jolene's stand, onto the head of the vacuum, giving it like little sunglasses and making it that ocean type blue. And I thought it was a really cool way to incorporate Jolene's character, which I think was overall just a pattern of how I incorporated Jolene's character, foregoing the main designs of her character, that being hairstyle, clothing, etc., and adding her more in through colors and patterns. And by doing that, admittedly, Jolene's colors mixed with Kurumi's apron, or Marie's apron, whichever one it was, does make this character look like a Starbucks barista. But, oops. And finally, for this drawing and the next one, I tried to do a sort of backlighting, making the main source of light on the character coming from behind them. It works slightly better in this one than it does the next one, but we'll get to that. But that's mostly because I didn't make the backlight in Kira Buckland's here the main source of light. It is the light from the wings is a totally separate light source from the one coming from in front off to the side of the character and lighting her that way. I really like how it turned out because you get that blue halo around the character from the wings and it looks really cool. But because most of the edges were lit, I didn't really include that Marvel Rivals rim lighting on this one. However, in the next one I did. But before we get to our final piece, let's take a look at Kira Buckland fusing Marie from Skullgirls, Jolene Kujo from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, 2B from Nier Automata, and Kurumi Tojo from Danganronpa V3. In the deepest pits of hell, crime runs rampant. Sinners live by the rules of kill or be killed. But even that isn't enough, as every so often, angels would come down from the heavens and massacre the sinners. Life was far from pleasant here. Despite all that, one poor soul had it worse than anyone else. Mirabelle Kane was raised by her adopted family with no idea where she came from. But when she did find out, she wished she hadn't. When she was about 5, a young Mirabelle sprouted a beautiful set of feathery wings, something that had never been seen in hell before. Mirabelle was an angel. With her past finally revealed, her family's attitude towards her changed. They were more neglectful towards Mirabelle than any of her other siblings, and they gradually began to distance themselves from her. Soon, Mirabelle was all alone, barely even having a roof over her head. She so desperately wanted to prove to her family that she wasn't like the angels that would come down and kill sinners, but they wouldn't listen. She came up with an idea. If she gave sinners of hell hope, then maybe they would rise against the angels and defend themselves. Mirabelle crafted a combat suit and patrolled the streets of hell from the shadows, rescuing any sinners that came under the attack by the angels. She had no idea if her family ever caught wind of her actions or even knew it was her, but before long, that didn't seem to matter. What mattered to Mirabelle now was protecting the people she so deeply cared about, even if they didn't return the favor. Okay, now ignore what I said about Kira Buckland's fusion. This was the hardest one for me to do in the series. Slightly less in the design and more so in the construction of the basic form of the character. Let me tell you, those hands were a nightmare to try and draw. But, you know, like, you really don't have to pay attention to those. You could just pretend that this character doesn't even have hands. Just block those out. They don't matter. You don't need to see them. What you can focus on, though, is the fact that this came from a list of suggestions by Benjamin Neal, who suggested 35 voice actors and actresses that I could use in this series. And I have to commend the dedication. Nice work, Ben. Now, the characters within this particular suggestion for Stephanie Beatriz were pretty tricky, thanks mostly to Batwoman, as her character is kind of just one connected piece overall. It is just the Batsuit, and that's it. So because of that, it was hard to find which parts I could swap out for the other two characters while still keeping it in the realm of a superhero outfit. My solution was to, in a sense, split the Batwoman costume into threes and then go piece by piece, looking for areas where I can implement designs from Mirabelle and Vaggie. In the face, I rounded out the eye holes from the cowl, or rather one of the eyes, in a reference to Mirabelle's glasses. A little bit more subtle than I usually do in this series, but still a part that I felt cool including. And then I included the outline of Vaggie's design, which is just part of the Has Been Hotel style, and put that over the eye shape, which I thought was pretty cool, taking something stylistic and turning it more into like a physical part of the Batsuit. Honestly, it does make it reach more into the realm of Owlman than Batwoman, but still really cool. Obviously, I also included Vaggie's X over the other eye and put Vaggie's bow in the hair of the character. For the hair of the character, I combined Mirabelle's curly hair, which, may I say, I really enjoy, especially since curly hair is the bane of my existence, and dyed that with the Batwoman deep red hair color. And I'll be the first to admit that the one crossed out eye with the red curly hair really makes it look like Ragatha is one of the characters in this fusion. So all I have to say is, once again, oops. Now, for the arms and the legs, I trimmed off the arms of the Batsuit, allowing me to add Vaggie's ruffles and armbands to her shoulders and arms. Then I added that frilly collar that Mirabelle has at the top of her dress. I think it's called a ruff, but I'm not 100% sure on that, so I do apologize if I got that wrong. That was the only thing I was able to find in my research. But by doing that, I changed the bat symbol on the chest to a butterfly symbol and used that butterfly patterning going around the collar. I didn't change anything else about the character to resemble a butterfly, but I changed the symbol, so points for effort. And then I added more of Mirabelle's design into the bottom by making her lower half more dress-like and using Supergirl's costume design to justify why a crime-fighting superheroine would be sporting a long and frilly dress. And as a final addition of Vaggie and Mirabelle, I replaced Batwoman's cape with Vaggie's wings and adorned them with the floral pattern that you see on the bottom of Mirabelle's dress. But I'm the type of person who likes to do everything by myself and manually. But by getting Clip Studio Paint, I now have access to this whole marketplace filled with tons of different tools and brushes and references, and I really wanted to try out some of those. So I went into the marketplace and found this floral pattern brush, which was exactly what I was looking for. And admittedly, I could have maybe added a little bit more to the flowery designs overall, just to give them a bit more pizzazz, but I do still like the way they are in their base form on these wings. And like I mentioned with Kira Buckland, I went with a backlight to sell the Batwoman aesthetic of this character. However, unfortunately, by doing that and making the only source of light from behind the character, I pretty much erased all detail within the drawing. I think if the main color of the character wasn't so dark to begin with, it wouldn't come out as muddy, but with the harsh shadows on top of that nearly black outfit already, it really makes a bulk of the character really hard to see. Don't get me wrong, it looks really cool, especially the rim lighting on like the fingers and the head. But for a series where the whole point is to see the character's design, it really takes away from it. But nevertheless, let's see if you can still enjoy Stephanie Beatriz's fusion of Vaggie from Hazbin Hotel, Mirabelle from Encanto, and Batwoman, specifically from the Catwoman Hunted movie. It's really good to know that no matter how many times I do this episode, it's always so fun and refreshing to come back to it. Thank you all so much to the people who suggested voice actors for me to use in this episode and all the previous ones. And if you have a voice actor or specific characters or even a theme to base one of these episodes off of, feel free to leave it in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe button, as it really helps out the channel, especially now where the YouTube algorithm is all sorts of off the rails. And if you want to see the series continue, make sure to check out the other episodes in the Voice Actor Fusion series and show your support there, especially episode 6. I'm not gonna let the episode with my favorite voice actor be the least viewed in the series, right? That's what I thought. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. My name is KyngPin Creations, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.